Fourth graders, welcome back. Glad to have you back here at our 2020 virtual school days from the American Civil War Museum here in Tiffin, Ohio. Hope you were able to enjoy the Indian powwow experience and watch those YouTube videos and have a great experience added to your virtual school days. Up now, we are going to introduce Mr. Jim Stultz. Jim's going to invite you to participate in our 9 men's Morris game, and he'll be virtually walking you through there. As a reminder, before we get started there, we do have that live chat available, and if I haven't done so before, please check in as a school so we know you're there. Maybe we'll call out to the school and see how things are going for you today, and see if you have any questions specifically around the event where we are live streaming to you at the time. Also, if you do happen to jump on late, or if you're going to miss a session in the future, don't forget, those links are going to be valid and work after the event to live stream these recorded versions of what we're showing you today. So with that, I'm proud to introduce Mr. Jim Stultz.
Good morning. My name is Mr. Stultz, and I'll be showing you how to make the board for a game called 9 Men Morris. The origins of this game go back to Roman times, and Revolutionary War soldiers also were known to play the game because it's easily made up for items that are readily available. There are also some references to Native Americans playing a very similar game. This version of the game was found on a website, George Mason's Gunston Hall, which is a plantation museum in Fairfax County, Virginia, and it's a neighbor of Mount Vernon. Get out my writing box here and get out my tools. Which includes a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper, a pencil, newly invented, by the way, a ruler, and 2 sets of men. In my case, I found some pebbles and some shells. So we'll kind of put those to the side at the moment. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do, the paper is 8.5 inches wide and 11 inches long. So I'm going to mark off here and make it into a square. 8.5 by 8.5. Then just tear off this little section of the paper. Now, what we're going to do is draw 3 boxes on this piece of paper. Each box will be progressively smaller, and the second and the third squares or boxes will be inside the first one. So I'm going to use my ruler to make the lines of the first box. Now, just a little bit about George Mason. And Gunston Hall. Gunston Hall was completed in 1758 under the supervision of George Mason and his wife Anne. Mr. Mason was a neighbor and a longtime friend of George Washington. He was a plantation owner, a slave owner. He was a politician, and he was a delegate to both the Constitutional Convention and the Virginia Ratification Convention. So there's our first box. And then again, I'm going to use the ruler to draw in the second box. Now, I don't know if you covered this yesterday, but September 17th was Constitution Day. The day in 1787 that the delegates to the Constitutional Convention signed that document in Philadelphia. George Mason, as I said before, was a delegate to that Constitutional Convention from Virginia. But he was one of 3 delegates that, in attendance at the end of the convention, that decided not to sign the document in protest. So we got 2 of our 3 squares. Now for the last one. Though many of the clauses in the Constitution show the makings of Mr. Mason's writing and speeches, he decided not to sign it. One of his main reasons was the absence of a list of rights for the people. All of his objections were actually written into a pamphlet entitled Objections to this Constitution of Government, which was released during the state's ratification process. During this process, ratification by 2/3 of the 13 states was needed for the Constitution to go into effect, and each state conducted its own ratification convention. Now, we have our 3 squares. We are going to draw first diagonal lines. Then some lines at the midpoints. Mr. Mason was again a delegate at the Virginia Ratification Convention in Richmond. He spoke several times during that convention. I'm going to measure the midpoint of the lines. If you remember, the paper is 8.5 inches wide, and half of 8.5, for those that are learning to multiply and divide fractions, is 4 1/4. So at 4 1/4, we'll make a mark. And each of the outside lines. In the end, the Virginia Convention passed the Constitution without any amendments by a slim margin. At the end of the convention, following the ratification vote, Mr. Mason was appointed to a committee to compile a list of recommended amendments. Mr. Madison's list was adopted by the committee and passed by the convention. Now, again, I'm drawing lines at the midpoints. So, there we have, I'll darken this line a little bit more. There we have our board for our, whoop, I forgot one diagonal line. Forgive me. Then we'll put dots at all the intersections. And this is where you'll place your men. And there is our board for the 9-man Morris. After the ratification of convention, George Mason returned to Gunston Hall and from then on devoted himself to his family, his farm, and the local affairs. Because of his opposition to the Constitution, his friendship with George Washington ended up in resentment on both sides. Now, Mr. Mason held no other political office after the passage of the Constitution. In fact, he refused a nomination to fill a vacant Senate seat. But he did keep in touch with state and national figures through correspondence, and it seems by the correspondence that his position on the Constitution softened somewhat towards confidence in some respects. Sometimes referred to as the father of the Bill of Rights, his many recommendations from the Virginia Ratification Convention were adopted in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Known as the Bill of Rights, these amendments passed as a group in 1791. George Mason IV died in his home in October of 1792, not long after the Constitution, after the Bill of Rights was approved. Now, to play the game, you need to decide, I guess, first of all, who's going to go first. Well, in this case, Pebbles are going to go first. And what you do, one at a time, taking turns, you place men on the different squares, trying to block your opponent from getting 3 in a row. If you get 3 in a row, that's called a mill. And in getting 3 in a row, you in fact can take one of your opponent's men off of the board. Now, once you fill up the board, and with nobody, whether or not no one gets 3 in a row, there's 3 in a row. So you get to take one of those off. You keep, at this point, you each have 9 men on the board. And you move the men one at a time, still trying to get 3 in a row. And you keep doing that until one of the sides only has 2 men left. So what I'm going to do is move that man there, and he's going to come here. Now I'm going to move that back and take one more of these off. You have to stay on a line, move only on the lines. There's no jumping over men, no moving your piece to some other location on the board except following the line to the next dot. And like I say, the game ends when one of the players has only 2 men left on the board, or you can't make any other moves because you're blocked. And that's 9-man Morris. Thanks for your attention. I hope that you've participated in making one of these boards or going to do it at home. And thank you for your attention. And our next presentation will be at 10 o'clock. Thank you very much.